Aita for cutting contact with my brother-in-law after years of harassment. I, 32F, have been dealing with harassment from my brother-in-law, Jake, 38M, for the past 5 years. It all started when I married his younger brother, Tom, 30M. At first, Jake seemed friendly enough, but things quickly took a turn for the worse. It began with small comments at family gatherings. Jake would make jokes about my appearance or my job as a teacher. I tried to brush them off, thinking he was just trying to be funny. But over time, the comments became more frequent and more hurtful. One Thanksgiving, Jake loudly asked when Tom and I were going to have kids. I explained that we weren't ready yet, but Jake wouldn't let it go. He kept pushing, saying things like, "You're not getting any younger," and "Tom needs someone to carry on the family name." I was embarrassed and upset, but I didn't want to cause a scene at dinner. After that, Jake started texting me regularly. At first, it was just random memes or jokes, but then he began sending messages late at night, asking personal questions about my relationship with Tom. I told Tom about it, and he said Jake was probably just lonely since his divorce. He suggested I ignore the messages, but the texts kept coming. Jake would comment on my social media posts, often with inappropriate remarks. He'd show up at my workplace unannounced, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. It got to the point where I feared family gatherings because I knew Jake would be there. Last Christmas, things came to a head. Jake had been drinking and cornered me in the kitchen. He started talking about how Tom didn't appreciate me and how he would treat me right if he had the chance. I was scared and uncomfortable. I managed to slip away and told Tom what happened. Tom confronted Jake, but Jake played it off as a joke and said I was overreacting. After that incident, I decided I'd had enough. I blocked Jake's number and all his social media accounts. I told Tom I didn't want to attend any family events where Jake would be present. Tom was upset at first, saying I was tearing the family apart. But after I showed him all the messages and explained how Jake's behavior had been affecting me, he reluctantly agreed. Now, Jake has been telling everyone in the family that I'm dramatic and causing problems. Some of Tom's relatives have been calling and texting saying I need to forgive Jake and move on for the sake of family harmony. Tom's parents are especially upset, saying I'm keeping their sons apart. I feel like I'm at my wit's end. I don't want to cause problems in the family, but I also don't feel safe or comfortable around Jake. Tom is torn between supporting me and keeping peace with his family. I'm starting to wonder if I'm overreacting or if I'm justified in cutting contact with Jake. So, Reddit, AETA for cutting contact with my brother-in-law and potentially causing a rift in my husband's family. Update. Hey everyone, I'm back with an update to my situation with Jake, my brother-in-law. A lot has happened since my last post, and I'm more confused than ever. After all the family drama, I started to think about what Tom had said about Jake being lonely after his divorce. I felt bad for cutting him off completely and wondered if maybe I had been too harsh. I thought that if Jake had someone in his life, he might stop gripping on me. I talked to Tom about this idea, and he was excited about the possibility of helping his brother. We agreed that finding Jake a date might be a good way to help him move on and hopefully improve our family situation. I had a friend, Sarah, who had recently gone through a breakup. I thought she and Jake might hit it off, so I decided to set them up. I was nervous about contacting Jake after everything that had happened, but I figured it was worth a try for the sake of family peace. I sent Jake a text, keeping it casual. I said I wanted to talk to him about something important. He responded quickly, which surprised me. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop. When I met Jake, I was on guard, but he seemed different. He was polite and didn't make any inappropriate comments. I told him about Sarah and suggested that they might get along well. I explained that Sarah was interested in meeting him, even though I hadn't actually told her about Jake yet. Jake's reaction wasn't what I expected. He smiled and said he'd be happy to meet Sarah. He thanked me for thinking of him and said he appreciated the effort to mend fences. I felt relieved and thought maybe this could be a turning point. I left the coffee shop feeling hopeful. I quickly called Sarah and told her about Jake, leaving out the details of our past issues. She agreed to go on a date with him, and I set everything up. The night of their date came, and I was anxious to hear how it went. Sarah called me the next day, and my heart sank. She said Jake had been charming at first, but as the night went on, he started making inappropriate comments and trying to get physically close to her. She felt uncomfortable and ended the date early. I was shocked and disappointed. I apologized profusely to Sarah for putting her in that situation. She was understanding but said she didn't want to see Jake again. A few days later, I received a text from Jake. It said, "Thanks for introducing me to Sarah. She's cute, but not as cute as you. When are we going to have our own date?" I felt sick to my stomach. I realized that Jake had just been playing along when I suggested setting him up. He probably thought this was a way to get closer to me. I showed the text to Tom, and this time he was furious. He finally saw Jake's behavior for what it was. Tom called Jake and told him in no uncertain terms to leave me alone. Now, Jake is playing the victim again. He's telling the family that I led him on by setting him up with my friend and that Tom is overreacting. Some family members are still taking his side, saying we're all misunderstanding each other. I feel terrible for dragging Sarah into this mess. I also feel guilty for thinking I could fix Jake by finding him a date. Now the family situation is even worse than before. Tom and I are united in our decision to keep Jake out of our lives, but the family pressure is intense. We're considering moving to a different city to get some distance from all of this drama. I don't know what to do next. I tried to help, and it backfired hugely. I'm starting to think there's no way to resolve this situation without completely cutting ties with Tom's family. Am I the asshole for trying to set Jake up and making things worse? Should I have just stuck to my original plan of no contact? I'm lost and could use some advice. Update 2. I can't believe I'm back here again, but things have taken an even worse turn. Just when I thought the situation with Jake couldn't get any more complicated, it's blown up in our faces. A few days after the disastrous attempt to set Jake up with Sarah, we received a bombshell. Jake called Tom and told him that he wanted us to move out of the house we've been living in. I should probably mention that the house belongs to Jake. He inherited it from our grandparents and has been renting it to us at a reduced rate for the past 3 years. Jake claimed that our accusations and drama were causing him severe mental distress. He said he couldn't bear the thought of us living on his property anymore. We were given 30 days to find a new place and move out. Tom and I were shocked. We knew the situation with Jake was bad, but we never expected him to go this far. Tom was furious and immediately called his parents to explain the situation, hoping they would talk some sense into Jake. To our surprise and disappointment, Jake's parents sided with him. They told Tom that Jake was going through a difficult time and that our constant attacks on his character were making things worse. They suggested that maybe some distance would be good for everyone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything Jake had done, they were taking his side. Tom tried to reason with his parents. He reminded them of all the inappropriate things Jake had done, the harassment I had endured, and how Jake had behaved on the date with Sarah. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They kept making excuses for Jake, saying he was misunderstood and that we were blowing things out of proportion. It became clear that Jake had always been the golden child in the family. No matter what he did, his parents would find a way to justify it. They even suggested that I might have been leading Jake on or misinterpreting his friendliness. Tom was furious. He yelled at his parents, telling them they were enabling Jake's behavior and that they were choosing Jake over their own grandchildren. We have 2 kids, ages 3 and 5, who I haven't mentioned much in these posts to protect their privacy. The argument ended with Tom's father telling him to man up and stop complaining. He said that if we couldn't appreciate Jake's generosity in renting us the house, maybe it was best we left. Now we're scrambling to find a new place to live. The rental market in our area is tough, and we're struggling to find something we can afford on such short notice. Tom is stressed and angry, constantly muttering about how he can't believe his family is treating us this way. The kids are confused and upset. They don't understand why we have to move or why they can't see their grandparents as often. It breaks my heart to see them caught in the middle of all this adult drama. I feel guilty, like this is all my fault. If I had just kept quiet about Jake's behavior, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. But then I remind myself that I shouldn't have to endure harassment just to keep the peace. Tom is talking about cutting ties with his entire family. He says he can't forgive them for choosing Jake over us, especially when it affects our children. Part of me agrees with him, but another part worries about the long-term consequences of such a drastic step. I don't know what to do. We're facing the prospect of being homeless if we can't find a place soon. Our relationship with Tom's family seems irreparably damaged, and through it all, Jake is coming out smelling like roses, painted as the victim by his enabling parents. Should I have just endured his behavior to keep the peace and a roof over our heads? I feel lost, angry, and scared for our future. Update. After everything that happened, I realized we needed to take a different approach. Tom and I decided to reach out to his grandfather, who originally owned the house we were living in. We hoped he might have some influence over the situation. We invited Grandpa Joe over for coffee one afternoon. At first, we just caught up on family news and showed him pictures of the kids. But then, I took a deep breath and started explaining everything that had happened with Jake over the years. I told Grandpa Joe about the inappropriate comments, the late-night messages, and how Jake had behaved at family gatherings. I shared how uncomfortable and scared I'd felt, and how it had affected our family. Tom backed me up, adding details I'd forgotten, and explaining how hurt he was by his brother's actions. At first, Grandpa Joe looked skeptical. Jake had always been his golden grandchild, and I could tell he was having trouble believing what we were saying. But as we continued to talk, showing him some of the text messages Jake had sent, and recounting specific incidents, I saw his expression change. The turning point came when we told him about Jake kicking us out of the house and how Tom's parents had sided with Jake. Grandpa Joe's face turned red with anger. He couldn't believe that his son and daughter-in-law would choose Jake over their other son and grandchildren. After a long silence, Grandpa Joe said, "I think I need to have a talk with Jake and your parents." He asked us to stay in the house for now and not to worry about moving out. A week later, Grandpa Joe called us. He'd spoken to Jake, confronting him with everything we'd told him. At first, Jake had tried to deny it, but faced with the evidence and his grandfather's disappointment, he eventually broke down and admitted to his behavior. Grandpa Joe had also talked to Tom's parents, making it clear that he didn't approve of how they'd handled the situation. He reminded them that the house was meant for all his grandchildren, not just Jake. The result? We're allowed to stay in the house. Jake has been told in no uncertain terms that he needs to leave us alone. Grandpa Joe made it clear that if Jake harasses me again, he'll face serious consequences, including potential legal action. Tom's parents called to apologize. They said they hadn't realized how bad things had gotten and admitted they should have listened to us earlier. It's a start, but Tom and I know it'll take time to rebuild trust. As for Jake, he's been told to seek counseling to deal with his issues. He's not allowed to contact me directly anymore. All communication has to go through Tom or his parents. It's not a perfect ending. There's still tension in the family, and I don't know if I'll ever feel completely comfortable around Jake again. But for the first time in years, I feel like we've been heard, and our concerns have been taken seriously. We're focusing now on healing as a family and creating a safe, stable environment for our kids. It's been a long, difficult journey, but I finally feel like we're on the right path. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support throughout this ordeal. It meant more than you know.